Fantastic. So, firstly, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our first ecologiQ Supplier Masterclass. My name's Doyle. I'm the industry manager with ecologiQ. So it's great to have you here. This is actually the first of a new series that will be kicking off, and we thought Circular Economy Week this week is no better time than to come out and start really sharing some of the best practices and what we can get and intel and impart to you what we think is going to be the way forward. So those of you who came to our ecology conference would have known that this year a big theme was about the transition to net zero, the impact of carbon, and that a lot of our future projects and not just within transport infrastructure, but whichever industry that you're in, that understanding your carbon impacts and life cycle of your products is going to be really crucial and something that's going to be highly sought after as well. So to that end, I've enlisted the help of my colleagues in the implementation team, Polly and Ben, as well as a couple of key industry representatives that come and have a chat to you and share with you their journey about understanding the carbon footprint of their products. So now, before we get started, I do want to acknowledge that we're meeting virtually, that we still meet on traditional lands. So for me, I'm dialing into you from the lands of the Wurundjeri and the Bunurong people. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land and their elders past, present and emerging, and any Aboriginal or First Nation people we might have with us today. So just to let you know, this session is being recorded. So after this, for those who missed this, you'll get a copy of the presentation slides. You'll actually also watch this on our YouTube or look it up on our Knowledge Hub as well. So without further delay, I will hand over now to Ollie to take us through.
Sorry, Dewey, sorry to interrupt. I think my few of my colleagues, can't see the screen. Is that still the case? Can you see now? Sorry, so they're actually trying to see the screen. They were not able to see the screen before.
I've just resumed sharing, so hopefully you can see that again.
Let me check with them again quickly.
Great. Just while Sasika does that, thanks Doi for the introduction. And I guess I just wanted to touch on the team today. So myself and Ben work in the implementation team. So Ben will be doing most of the talking from our side today, but I'll just do a little bit of introductions. Next slide, please, Doi. So as Doi mentioned, we've got some great representation from the industry today. So we've got Steve Morris, the head of circular economy from Close the Loop, talking about Tonoplast today. We've got Dr. Jim Godden, who is joining us from the UK. So big shout out for staying up to very early hours in the morning. And he's from ThinkStep, so he'll be talking in a bit more detail around some of the product certifications. And then we have Sasika Perera, who's working on the Northeast Link Northern Alliance, talking about their experience primarily with EPDs and Material Circularity Index. Next slide. Thanks, Joy. Great. So I guess a little bit of background around why we wanted to run this session. Doi mentioned, there's a lot more interest around carbon. I think that's probably the hot topic. Everyone's looking at how they can decarbonize and, setting more ambitious targets for what that looks like. And, we know that circular economy and recycled products and carbon are interlinked. So it's really starting to have a bit more focus on what are the carbon emissions and footprints associated with some of these products. And we know that this is quite a complicated area, so we thought that today would be a good sort of high-level intro into the different options that are available to you. Next slide, thank you. So I guess the two kind of mega projects to talk about from an MTIA perspective, we've got Suburban Rail Loop, so they have set some really ambitious targets around Green Star and the ISC ratings. And as part of that, they'll be looking for as many materials that fall in that responsible products framework. So, we've been discussing internally, this is a really great opportunity for a lot of our suppliers to move from just the kind of infrastructure space into some of the more building stations, sort of green building area. So this is a great opportunity provided with Suburban Rail Loop. Next slide. Thanks, Joy. Yep. So I guess the other one to talk about is Northeast Link. So again, this is a project that's set really ambitious targets around EPDs and material circularity index. We'll be hearing firsthand from Sasika about that later. But yeah, just a little bit more of a flavour for why this is important and where the opportunity exists within the major transport portfolio. And then just sort of finishing out, really coming back to all of the focus at the moment around carbon. There's a lot of work going on at a federal level around setting a price on carbon and a consistent way to measure. And then certainly from a state level, noting Victoria has really ambitious decarbonisation targets. So this has got a really important part to play in that, which is why we're talking about it today. So I will hand over to Ben to talk a little bit more about some of the product certifications.
Great, thanks, Polly. Just while we're on this slide as well, I want to touch on a couple of other, things that are happening in the background. As you can see on the left, there's this greenwashing by Business in Australia report that came out this year. And there seems to be quite a push from federal government, but also state as well, about looking at getting the data to back up a lot of sustainability claims, that we're starting to move into this area now where it's just not good enough to make a claim, but is also need that data in the background to verify what you're claiming. The other one is that we're moving towards a standard framework for embodied emission calculation, particularly in infrastructure. And this framework is really, really going to be focusing on using data from specific suppliers where it's available and having those verification measures in the back end for us to effectively measure carbon on our projects. Next slide. Thanks, Doi. So two other things we want to touch on is, how this works in with some of the rating schemes on projects that you would have heard of, both Green Star and ISC. If you can go to next slide, Doi. So Green Star is just currently in the process of launching their responsible products framework, which you may have already heard as part of their buildings tool as responsible structures, responsible finishes, and responsible envelope credits. But they are also now looking at having what is called a responsible product framework. If you go to the next slide, Doi. Essentially, this framework is going to be, this database is going to be a database of products that meet a certain score that can then be used to satisfy these credits under Green Star, and will basically be a, information, hotspot for projects moving forward, where they can find these products and then use them directly for calculating their responsible product score as part of these credits. Just on this page, I just have an example of their new tool that they're launching, which is basically a new calculator that works in line with this products framework. And they both work interlinked. And I think where we want to get to is we want to start to get more and more of our recycle first suppliers into this framework as well, so that they can get on both, both buildings and infrastructure space. Next slide, thanks, Doi. So how this responsible product value that's used for these credits is calculated is it's calculated based on these certification initiatives. And basically you get awarded points depending on which certification initiative you can do. You can also get more points by targeting different certification initiatives. So say if you look at something that's around carbon emissions disclosure, but then you also have a certification around social responsibility, that'll actually get you more points under this framework. And that's where it starts to, provide a bit of commercial incentive to yourselves, is that projects will see this and then they'll be able to get more points towards their Green Star credits. You can go next slide, thanks, Doi. I won't touch on this in too much detail, but there is a score checker online. So if you are thinking of doing a certification, or you're thinking of doing multiple certifications, you can go onto the Green Star website and click through. There's all the available certifications now that count towards this framework on there. And you can basically sit there and go, if I was to do an EPD on something else, this will get me X number of points in the responsible product framework. So yeah, I won't touch on that too much, but yeah, there is tools available now for you to start looking at if you are thinking about going down that path. Start looking at that. Next slide, thanks, Doi. ISC also has, Infrastructure Sustainability Council also has a sustainable label products and supply chain credit as well that works quite similarly to the Green Star credit. There are slightly less certifications under that credit, but there is some overlap as well. So by doing it, you're not excluding yourself from contributing to credits towards an ISC certification. Similarly, if you just get one because you want to mostly be on infrastructure projects, there may be some overlap that you could be in that responsible products framework. So just some things to consider, I guess, if you're just starting your journey towards this and seeing how it may benefit yourself and your business and getting onto more of these projects and helping contribute to more of these sustainability rating schemes. Next slide, thanks, Doi. I just done a quick overview of some of the common, I guess, certification or verification schemes for sustainable materials, but I'm definitely not going to go into all the detail because we have some very knowledgeable people on this call that can delve further into it. But if you go to the next slide, Doi. Most common one that most people have heard of is the EPD, or the Environmental Product Declaration. This is quite common, and yeah, I'm just going to touch on it briefly. But there are, I guess, a lot of reasons why you should start thinking or consider thinking investing in EPDs. It is something that does take a bit of time. So it's, yeah, if you start planning it now and thinking about how you can go about doing it, when's the best time to do it, that's a really good idea. But yeah, there's multiple things, but I think one of the main ones is helping you get specified and get involved in these projects that are seeking these Green Star or ISC certifications is one of the other ones. But there's also showing your commitment to actually reducing your carbon is one of the other reasonings behind it. Next one, thanks, Doi. Another common one that's thrown around is GECA, or Good Environmental Choice Australia, which they have a recycled product certification, which is very applicable, I believe, to a lot of our suppliers in Recycle First. Not going to touch on this one too much, but it is another option, and it does grant you both points under ISC and the Green Star Responsible Product Framework. Next slide, thanks, Doi. Global Green Tag. This is another one that's quite common for interior products and interior finished products. A lot of them look at this as, because there is such a diverse rating, particularly with regards to health and ecotoxicity. They're ranked in that. They're ranked from good through to world leading for materials, and they're given all this marketing material and the sign branding that goes with the Global Green Tag brand. Again, counts both towards at least the Green Star Responsible Product Framework. Not so sure about the ISC credits, but definitely towards the Responsible Product Framework, this will count as well. Next slide, thanks, Doi. And then the last one that I'm going to touch on, which currently isn't included in either, but is a very, very good tool. And I have some very knowledgeable people on this call with regard to the material circularity indicator, which I won't go into too much detail on, but yeah, it does really look at the circularity of products and can be quite a beneficial tool, particularly when reviewing your processes and your supply chains about how we can do better moving our products to more circularity. So on that note, I will stop talking and hand over to our first guest presenter to speak more about their experience with looking at material rating tools and certifications. Next slide, thanks, Doi. So I'll hand over to Steve Morris, Head of Circular Economy at Close the Loop, to give you a bit of a presentation about his experience with both EPDs and MCI. So I'll hand over to Steve.
Thank you, Ben. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Really great to be here with you today. I'll start by explaining that Close the Loop is a product stewardship, circular economy company in multiple industries we work across, but our real passion and the topic of our conversation here today is our Tonoplast product, which has been made from mixed waste plastics, and it does improve the performance of asphalt roads. Let me point here, I don't know where your screen is set up, but on this particular slide, the Downer logo is there for a very good reason, because we partnered with Downer for 10 years now to develop and bring to market what we believe is a fantastic product in Tonoplast. You'll hear of it in Downer's Reconifelt product, and that image you can see, providing the box of all of our pretty faces isn't covering it, is a road. So that's the M80 freeway upgrade, which was our most recent state government project. There is Tonoplast in that upgrade, as well as the Monash freeway upgrade. Next slide, Dewey, please. So yeah, 10-year overnight success. Look, all really innovative products take a lot of time no, maybe not all. I can think of a couple of exceptions, but this one certainly has taken a lot of time. We have developed a product that modifies the performance of an asphalt road, improves its deformation resistance, its fatigue life, reduces the carbon footprint of that asset, and importantly, is made from problematic mixed plastic wastes. Now, the two most important questions I get, I'm going to deal with straight off the cuff. The first one is, but surely plastics in roads is not a good thing, and in terms of microplastics. And I say, well, no, that's not the case. In fact, polymer modified binders have been used in the world's highest performing roads for 80 odd years. And the fact that we're doing the same thing with a recycled polymer, the polymer doesn't behave any differently. It doesn't jump out of the road and report as a microplastic, because the melt temperature of this additive is lower than the melt temperature of the binder when it's added to the asphalt plant. So it becomes part of the binder matrix. Next slide, please, Dewey. So how is it made? And believe me, we are getting on to the main topic of today, which is Material Circularity Index. But I want to give you a little bit of background as to how it's made. Don't worry about the R-Flex at the bottom, although that's an interesting product we can talk about another time. That's red cycle mixed soft plastics. That's what we call the mongrel mix. It's post-consumer, and it's problematic for most, but we put it through a advanced mechanical recycling process and turn it into a product you can see there in the hands. That goes in bulk bags to the asphalt plant, and it's pneumatically conveyed up to the drum mixer, added at the time the asphalt is manufactured, and then delivered to site in the asphalt trucks. Next slide, please, Dewey. This is the advanced mechanical recycling plant. I'm talking to you today from our new factory in Reservoir in Victoria. And we are currently installing a world's first mix melter. You know, all of you, if you contact me at any time, are welcome to come out and have a look at what we're doing. It will be commissioned mid-December, and that would be the time from then on, so 2024 onwards, to come out and have a look at this amazing technology. The IP is Australian, and the engineering is all done in Australia as well. We're very, very proud of that. Next slide, please, mate. So what we did, we looked at material circularity because we knew that it was going to give us an ability to stand out from the crowd, really. Downer's Reconifelt product has EPDs, all mixed designs right across Australia, which is a fantastic achievement. But still, other competing asphalts do as well. So we knew that there were ISC points available for material circularity, and as a circular economy company, we thought that would be a perfect way to differentiate Tonoplast in the market. So we reached out to Dr. James Godden, and Jim's with us today, which is brilliant. And you know, we being Close the Loop and Downer, and this is really important. We often talk about collaboration as being a key to success in the circular economy. This is a demonstration ongoing of collaboration between many different parties. Most importantly, in this case, Downer and Close the Loop. We have both combined our resources to build this material circularity index for Tonoplast and Reconifelt. Now, I'm not going to read each of the bullet points because I know you probably already have, but what we wanted to learn was how we could improve over time the circularity of Tonoplast and therein Reconifelt. And the biggest takeaway of what we did was understand which levers we can pull to improve the circularity of this particular additive. Next slide, please, Dewey. So we found an improvement in our circularity score. So we went from 0.64 for, let's call it the control section, to 0.68, and that doesn't sound like much, but as Jim will point out, the material circularity score goes from 0.1 to 1. So it's not a huge delta. The circularity gap you see in the diagram on the bottom left, that's the opportunity for improvement that was highlighted by going through this process of measuring the circularity of Reconifelt, including Tonoplast. And that circularity gap for us is largely the opportunity that we have to replace virgin materials with more recycled content. Even though we're much better than the control section, we've now shown a pathway forward to all players, both Downer and Close the Loop. Next slide, please. So the benefits are our willingness and our interest in supplying Tonoplast into an industry that's constantly striving for low carbon asphalt. It's one of the big goals on the radar for all asphalt companies, and we know Downer is there as well. What we've been able to do is to ask ThinkStep now to go the next stage for us, not only measuring one mix design for its circularity performance, but to build a tool so that we can add all our mixed designs and variations of those mixed designs, both actual and theoretical, so that we can use that tool to understand the path forward for us. So the key to better material circularity is to build more resilient products. And in this case, the big key, which has delivered a good material circularity score for us, is the fact that using Tonoplast improves the resilience, improves the fatigue life, the longevity of that asset. And if you think circular economy, pillar number 2 of the circular economy is to keep products. And if you can't keep the products in circularity for longer, keep the raw materials that the products are made from in circularity for longer. That's a big key to this circularity index as well. Getting to the end of my slides. Next one, please, mate. So that is my last slide, and I leave you with the message that the Tonoplast is shovel ready. We are a proven Australian technology. There's been hundreds of roads that have been laid in partnership with Downer and other asphalt companies throughout Australia, recently culminating in 2 major projects in Victoria, with all of those mixed designs certified by VicDOT, and that's paving the pardon that pun, paving the way to to Tonoplast being used right around the country in state and council roads, and particularly Sasika, we are targeting the Northeast Link Northern Alliance. So it's great to have you here, Sasika. Back to our friends at ecologiQ to transition.
No worries. Thank you very much, Steve. I'll now hand over, as a good segue, hand over to Dr. Jim Godden, Head of Circularity at ThinkStep, and he's going to tell you a bit more about, I guess, about material circularity and their work that they do at ThinkStep. So over to yourself, Jim.
Thanks, Ben, and thanks, Steve, for a great run through the MCI project. So yeah, I'm Jim Godden. I'm Head of Circular Economy at ThinkStep. I'm a materials engineer by background. So I'm going to take you through the MCI. I am one of the original authors of the MCI. So I work directly with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation in creating the methodology for the MCI and leading the update of that methodology in 2019. So next slide, please, Joey. So just briefly, in terms of who ThinkStep are, we're a consultancy based out of Australia and New Zealand. We have it says 40 sustainability experts. I think that's more like 50 now. It changes every time I try and present. We have over 15 years experience working in the sustainability space. And from the diagram on the right, you'll see what we cover in terms of corporate sustainability, product sustainability, software and tools. My particular area sits over there on the right-hand side of that diagram in terms of the circular economy, cradle to cradle. Next slide, please. And the real benefit that ThinkStep has is really understanding the linkages between these different metrics and forms of assessment. So how they come together and work together, and how we use them in combination to drive progress and benefit. Next slide, please. So just to go through circular economy in a nutshell, pardon the pun, just for those of you who don't necessarily understand what the circular economy is, or maybe need a little bit of a refresher. Next slide, please. Thanks, Stewie. So the circular economy was estimated to be a $4.5 trillion global opportunity. And it's really driven by the decoupling of growth from consumption. So it means designing out waste and pollution. It means keeping products and materials in use and regenerating natural systems. And that's really the left-hand side of the diagram, which we refer to as the butterfly diagram, which really reflects keeping those materials flowing at their highest value, and keeping technical materials and biological materials separate. It also entails a shift to renewable energy, because burning fossil fuel is itself not circular. It's a very one-way flow of materials. We don't get those materials back. And it also includes a shift in focus from doing less bad to doing more good. And I'll come on to that in a minute. Next slide, please, Dewey. So on the left-hand side, you can see a hierarchy. Some of you will be familiar with the reduce, reuse, recycle mantra. Here we represent the linear economy and the circular economy as that hierarchy. So shifting from uncollected waste through to landfill in the linear part, and then energy recovery for some materials, then recycling, remanufacturing, reuse and composting, avoidance and durability. And Steve made a very good point in terms of the durability of their Reconifelt. And that's one of the areas where they've scored really well. But one of the things we find quite often with discussions around circular economy is that the economy word gets forgotten quite quickly. And that's really one of the areas where we're looking to make gains and benefits, and it's the economic driver behind the circular economy model. And it's one of the things that's made circular economy as a concept stand out from things like cradle to cradle, which have preceded it, which have been more based around the environmental aspects. So circular economy does include targeting economic benefits as well as environmental and social benefits that go along with it. Next slide, please, too. So just to illustrate that, the circular economy is more than just waste avoidance. It's about capturing value. And if we look at those top parts of the hierarchy, the circular economy parts, moving from energy recovery to durability, we can visualize this in terms of the value that we're recapturing through those processes. So if we're recovering energy, all we're really getting back is the very minor value that's associated with the energy content of the materials. When we move to recycling, we're capturing at least part of the value of the materials. When we move to remanufacturing, we're capturing most of the manufactured value, moving to all of the manufactured value when we reuse. And when we go through to strategies such as avoidance and durability, we're really capturing, as well as the manufactured value, things like the installed value by not having to replace the product as often. We're not incurring the costs of having to put those materials back into service, as well as capturing the value of the materials themselves. So next slide, please, Jay. So we've discussed in terms of the circular economy, it's about designing out consumption of materials, it's about using regenerative materials, and there are all sorts of strategies that go along with that in terms of durability and increased utilization, reuse, remanufacturing, refurbishment, recycling, composting, energy recovery. The challenge with these that we discussed with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation back in 2011 was the issue of comparability. So if you look at things like durability, reuse, and recycling, the metrics that you would use to measure those are very different, which makes it difficult to compare those strategies against each other and to really understand how one would perform against the other. And likewise, if you're looking at the environmental impacts through something like an EPD, the calculations would be very different for those different strategies and would give you different results. So this problem of circularity having many levers is part of the challenge that the MCI was really designed to address. Next slide, please, Jay. So MCI isn't the only metric out there. There are a variety of different metrics, and they do follow different segments in terms of the scale and the impacts that are associated with it. We still have cradle to cradle, which is still one of the main product certifications that sit out there. MCI isn't a certification yet, but it is a calculation that can be verified. So whereas Cradle to Cradle covers really materials and products, MCI can cover materials, products through to business units and businesses, and we do apply it at that level as well. Alongside MCI, you have other metrics such as the circular transition indicators, which were developed by the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Below that, focusing on businesses and sectors, you have metrics like Circularity, which was the second metric developed by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And then moving beyond that, you have things like the CGRI, so the Circularity Gap Reporting Initiative, which really focuses on regions and sectors. So those are the main circularity metrics that exist out there, and MCI, I'm glad to say, is still one of the main ones that is in use by industry, and we're seeing an increased uptake and a shift from an internal use within the business to more of an external use and communicating the circularity of products based on the MCI. And alongside those, on the left-hand side, you have things like EPDs, carbon zero, climate active, as reporting that sits alongside the MCI. So just as a very brief background, I mean, the MCI calculation originally tried to encapsulate the environmental impacts, the economic impacts, aspects such as critical materials. And we did have a calculation at the beginning, which brought all of those different components in. But we realized very quickly that it was impossible then to understand how changes would impact the circularity of products beneficially, because you're changing so many things at the same time. By changing a model, it became impossible to work out what was actually going on and where the trade-offs existed. So that's the reason why we distilled down the MCI to focus purely on the material flows. But the benefit of that is that we can then use that against a variety of different metrics that sit alongside it. And a lot of those metrics come from tools like EPDs, and actually the MCI is designed to use a lot of the same input data. Next slide, please, Dee. So just very briefly, the material circularity indicator, we started development in 2013, first published this in 2015, and I led the update in 2018 to include biological material flows. Wide range of participants involved in developing the MCI, and I won't go through those. They are all written down in the methodology, which is free and open. You can pick up the document and read it, and it contains everything you need to know in terms of deployment. Next slide, please. So looking at the data that's required by the MCI, I said a lot of it is similar to what you'd find in an LCA or an EPD. So if we look at the left-hand side and the right-hand side of this diagram, you have a focus on material inputs, so where your materials are coming from, and what percentage comes from reuse, remanufacturing, recycling. And if it's biological content, the percentage that's regeneratively sourced, and obviously you have virgin as the balance. On the right-hand side, you have the material output, so where your material is going after use, how much is recovered, and then subsequently reused, remanufactured, recycled, etc. Those two components of the MCI can be used together without the middle component, and that strategy then focuses on reduction. So how do you reduce the amount of virgin materials coming in and the waste going out? The section in the middle focuses on product use and is really about avoidance. So how do you fundamentally decouple from the volume of material that you would need to fulfill the function that your product serves? And that can be based on either the lifetime of the product by making it last longer, the utility of the product by sharing the use of the model or using it more heavily, or also through light weighting, which is what we used for Steve's example. So using less material to serve the same function and reducing the amount of material that you need. All of those are against a reference product. So yeah, it's designed so that as the general performance of products in a particular sector improves, the benefit that you get from that product use component decreases, and then subsequently places a greater focus on sourcing your materials from recycling or remanufacturing, and making sure that those are subsequently recaptured and reused. Next slide, please. So as Steve said, the scale for MCI runs from 0 to 1. It's a bit of an odd quirk of the methodology that linear is actually set at 0.1. It's because there's a little bit of circularity left in reserve for products that are deliberately wasteful. So products that don't last as long or aren't as heavily utilized sit in that 0 to 0.1 section, and everything else is between 0.1 and 1. We do have a way of converting this into a percentage, which is probably easier to communicate, but that hasn't been formally adopted as part of the methodology as yet. Next slide, please, Joey. So this is a diagram that's included in the methodology, and I wanted to put this up because it highlights that circularity isn't static. It relies on a lot of things that are yet to happen. So in the case of asphalt, we're assuming that is going to be recycled at the end of use. And in order to achieve that MCI, we have to ensure that that is actually the case. And it's one of the benefits of the MCI is really that, of course, you get a score that reflects the circularity of your product, but it also highlights opportunities for intervention. It highlights sensitivities, so the factors that can fundamentally impact the actual circularity of your product. And this diagram really sets out, moving from a linear product on the left to a design circularity on the right, the need for continual updating and refreshing of your calculations to really understand whether you're tracking in the right direction. Are your products lasting as long as you expect them to? Are you recovering those products as effectively as you had intended? And those measurements are then part of that journey and represent opportunities for intervention if there are ways to improve the score. Next slide, please, do. And again, I mentioned other indicators. This is really an example of how those indicators can be used to represent individual components within a product and the product itself. So we can benchmark the circularity of a product against a variety of indicators, whether those are economic or environmental or social. Typically, they are either economic or environmental. Those are the ones that tend to be focused on the most, as you might expect. But we can also incorporate things like supply chain risks and those types of metric in here as well. But really, we can use this as a hotspot analysis to understand where the opportunities for intervention are, and to build that into a strategy for how we progressively improve the circularity of our products, targeting those areas which have the biggest bang for buck. Next slide, please, Stewie. And I mentioned indicators. I'm not going to go through all of these. They basically break down into things like material reutilization, environmental, social fairness, material health, economics, and regenerative systems. All of these can be focal points for the MCI to understand how circularity can improve these different metrics. Next slide, please, Dewey. I think this is really kind of bring things together in terms of what the MCI does. As I said, the MCI really focuses on the extent of decoupling from consumption and waste. So to what extent have we decoupled from that linear flow of materials through the economy and have implemented a circular flow used against EPDs? And we are seeing MCI published alongside EPDs increasingly. The EPD really helps to answer the question of whether circularity is actually beneficial, because it can actually result in higher environmental impacts in some cases. It can certainly result in higher costs if not implemented properly. So we don't want to assume that that's the case. We need to have that verification that not only are we improving the circularity of our products, but that circularity is beneficial in the context that we're seeking. As I said, EPDs and MCIs have very similar data requirements, and that is by design. There are some additional components that you need, particularly around the longevity of your product, which you might not find in an EPD or an LCA. But both MCIs and EPDs increasingly benefit from third-party verification. Traditionally, MCI was used internally within a business, but now as we're starting to see it published, those same requirements that we see for EPDs in terms of third-party verification and the certainty you have around the result also applies to MCIs, and that's something we're seeing increasingly. Next slide, please, Dee. So that's the end of my presentation. My email is there on the screen if you wanted to drop me a line. In terms of the MCI calculation itself, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation does have a tool on its website, but that really just illustrates how the MCI functions. There is also a free tool on the ThinkStep website that allows you to play with the MCI and to put scenarios into it. I'd encourage you to go and download that and have a go. And if you have any questions, to drop me a line. Thanks, Ben.
All right, so thank you very much, Jim. That was very, very informative, and appreciate you getting up so early in the morning to come speak to us. I think I definitely took a lot away from that, so very much appreciate it. For our last speaker, before we jump into questions, I will hand over to Sasika from Northeast sorry, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, Northeast Link Alliance, Northern Alliance, I believe, but I'm sure she'll correct me. But over to yourself, Sasika, and please jump in and correct my my poor pronunciation of your project organization. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you so much, Ben. Good afternoon, all. Thanks for joining. My name is Sasika Perera. Work as the Sustainability Engineering and Integration Advisor for the Northeast Link North package. My main role is to work with design, procurement, and construction team to deliver better sustainable outcome for the project. So at NELNA, we take pride in our commitment to sustainable practices. So, and EPD is one of the key items that we encourage our suppliers to have, because it's provide transparency and credibility about a product environmental impact, enabling project to make more sustainably responsible choices. Also, it helps us to have a comprehensive overall carbon model for the project, as we are not based on the guesstimates of carbon savings. As been highlighted before, NELNA is going through ISC rating version 2.1, and we have certain project-specific targets to achieve as a part of the our rating process and as a part of our contractual requirement. So having the EPDs and the carbon emissions written in there is very crucial for us. And it's also help us to make the informed decisions because we can compare environmental performance of different products offered by different suppliers and make informed decisions during the procurement process. I believe I have already communicated with most of the suppliers this. If not, then we actually have a weighting of 30% for the sustainability during the supply selection process, and having EPD is one of the evaluation criteria. So suppliers with EPDs will be benefited during our tender evaluation process. Also, it provides environmental awareness, as both Steve and Jim highlighted. So it's sort of provide the industry-wide awareness, as well as a project, we get to know what are the impacts of that particular product, and then are we making the right choices based on those impacts? And then we can encourage manufacturers to adopt more sustainable practices and improve environmental performance of their products. And then talked about the supply chain management very well, both Jim and Steve. So it's from the raw material to logistics. Having a EPD or product, having an EPD is to evaluate the environmental impact of the material and process in their supply chain, leading more sustainable sourcing and production practices is that we want as an alliance. So that's what we encourage our suppliers. Facilitation of the circular economy, we prefer to see the material circularity indicator, or the MCI, along with the EPDs, because they both encourage the use of products that are designed with a longer lifespan and easier recycling or repurposing in mind. So contributing to a circular economy model, and also helps us to achieve our recycle first commitments as a requirement of the alliance. Also the product improvement, which is very, very important, because as NELNA, we always talked about creating fundamental shifts in how infrastructure projects being delivered. So we want to work really close with our suppliers so that this EPD can be used as a tool to identify areas for improvement in their products manufacturing process or the sustainable design process. As Steve highlighted, we encourage suppliers to come up with innovative solutions to reduce the carbon intense part of their manufacturing process, so that both the parties can get benefit from it. Next slide, please. So our target is to get 60% of material used by dollar value to have third-party verified EPDs, and along with the MCI. So we are not just preferencing suppliers with EPDs. We are also willing to financially assist some of the small suppliers used on our project to build a capacity to develop their own EPDs to create a fundamental shift in how infrastructure is delivered. So that is one of our strategy. And the other two would be mandating having the EPDs for major suppliers like asphalt, concrete, steel, quarry products. So they definitely have to come up with the EPDs, and then as I mentioned, we have the EPD embedded into our subcontractor selection rating criteria. I will little bit go detail into how we actually are planning to do the selection of the small suppliers, where we actually willing to provide a little bit of a budget allocation to produce their own EPDs. We would prefer to have a product which is innovative and sustainable, preferably Victoria first or Australia first product, and then probably being used in the permanent work, because we actually have a large portion of temporary work, and then the permanent work. So we can help the suppliers who are we actually using for the temporary work, but we prefer the people who we're actually going to use in the permanent work, because that's what ISC covers. And then the being a small to medium sized business, and then the most important part would be the contribute to the dollar value, because our target, as I have highlighted here, is to have 60% of material used by dollar value to have third-party verified EPDs. So we prefer to choose suppliers from whom we are buying the products frequently. So that's our selection criteria. So I think from NELNA's point of view, we highly encourage suppliers to come with their EPDs. That's it from me.
Awesome, thanks, Sasika. Coming from project delivery, it's interesting to see these EPD, like specifically having targets around products with EPDs, and also being able to assist small suppliers, I think is quite admirable. So yeah, keen to see how that initiative rolls out across NELNA. Great, I believe, let me check the time. We do have some time for Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, I'll just remind you, I know Polly put something in the chat, but if you can just drop us a question in the chat, we'll put it forward to our panelists. But I thought I might kick us off and with a question, I guess both at Steve and Jim. If you're a supplier or a new supplier and you're starting to think, oh, I really want to start working with MCI, start evaluating how we're performing, and then also start looking at EPDs. What are some of the first steps, I guess, to take in that journey about moving towards, one, doing these measurements, but then two, using these measurements to, I guess, make more informed choices and hopefully improve your circularity and reduce your overall carbon emissions? I'll open that up to either Steve or Jim to kick off.
You want to have a go first?
Go first.
I can. Well, I can look.
Sure.
I can talk from the perspective of a product manufacturer who was seeking knowledge about our product. You know, because our product is made from 100% recycled content, I knew that we had a good start. I knew also that the test results over 10 years of work that demonstrate the improved performance and increased longevity of a mixed design that includes tonoplast was going to hold us in pretty good stead. So I would encourage anybody, when considering this process, to pick up the phone and talk to Jim, explain the circumstances and get a feel for the work, the performance that you might expect, or the work that you need to do to your product before having a mixed design, an MCI calculated for you. Jim?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think when approaching all of these, I think we have to approach it with the mindset of a journey. It's a process of continuous improvement. So understanding where you are now. So getting an idea of how your product works today, and your manufacturing works today, and identifying where those easy starting points are. You're not going to have a fully circular product from day one, or a zero carbon product from day one, but understanding where you are now, and what your strategy is for progressing that, and also communicating your environmental and circularity performance of your product. Communicating to your buyers and to the general public is part of that strategy. There's a huge storytelling component that goes along with the circular economy that we need to tap into, and obviously being mindful of all the interventions that are in place to prevent greenwashing. We are seeing an increasing amount of circular washing as well, and some disenchantment from the concept of circular economy as a result of that. And these metrics are really designed to help overcome some of that by providing a level of due diligence and assurance around what the circularity is. So yeah, I would encourage you to identify where you are, plan for the future, and just keep moving forward.
Ben, one quick thing to add to that, Ben, and that is to make sure that your customer has an interest and values this work and these measures.
Great. Yeah, thanks both. That was a very concise answer. Yeah, it's always, I think taking the first step is always kind of the most difficult, especially for something that's a relatively new concept for most people. So yeah, I was glad to hear that, yeah, there are ways and steps forward that we can all sort of take. We have had a question come through on the chat from Rod. So thank you very much, Rod. Just his question is roughly, he wants to know what, I guess, rough cost to gain MCI and EPD credentials for a given product. I know that this varies quite substantially, but maybe if you could answer one, what the rough costs are, but two, what are the costs, I guess, influence factors with getting an MCI and EPD, and if there is a difference between doing MCI versus doing a verified MCI, what the cost difference is there as well. I'll open that up probably to Jim, but also Steve as well, if you're happy to share any information.
Yeah, so that's always a difficult one to answer. I mean, I guess the answer with anything in this space is it depends. So it depends on the complexity of the product and the complexity of the application, and the level of verification. So whether it is simply a calculation for internal use or a calculation for communication externally. Obviously, if there is external communication, we want to make sure that the data is verified, and that the claims are all backed up and it is calculated based on sound data. And that pushes the costs up a little bit, because it requires more time. If you wanted to get started with MCI, as I said, there is a free calculator on our website. You can use it for free, and you can calculate the MCI for internal use for just a bit of your own time to throw some numbers in and see how it stacks up. But that's not what you need for communication. So you're probably looking at a few thousand, up to 10 or 20,000, depending on how many products and the complexity of those products, as a rough guide. I mean, as I said, it obviously depends.
Yeah, that's right. There's quite a difference in, I guess, product type and the extent of the supply chain.
Yeah, exactly. And as I said, with some of our clients, we have done assessments of their entire business, so looking at all of their products, and that has some benefits as well in terms of firstly providing a tool set that they can use to benchmark new products against their existing ones, but also in terms of highlighting commonality with material flows. If you have multiple products that you're producing, quite often those will include the same materials. So understanding where the volume aspects come in within your business for materials across multiple products can add additional benefits. And yeah, Steve said, we're looking at producing tools that will enable them to do this on a more generic basis as part of that identification of hotspots and intervention points.
Just building on that question a little bit, probably Jim and Steve again, is there any kind of indication or you can give around the time frame? So if we've got suppliers on the line who are thinking they want to go after an EPD, are they looking at a sort of 6-month or a 1-year process, or is there any info you can give around that?
Yes, I think with EPDs it does tend to be a bit longer. But yeah, I think the timeframes you've outlined are probably about right. Yeah, a few months. But again, it depends on the complexity of the product and the complexity of the data and the availability of the data. I think with a lot of these things, a lot of the time is spent tracking down the right data and making sure that it is correct. The calculations themselves are a relatively small component of the overall work. With something like an MCI for a product like Reconifelt, the calculations can be done in a couple of weeks once the data is all assembled. It's not hugely time consuming.
So it might be sort of a bit of good advice to potentially look at, say, an MCI as your kind of starting point, noting that a lot of that information can then be used for an EPD or a GECA or any of the other product certifications, because you've sort of got that foundation of data to work from.
Yeah, I think if you're going to look at EPDs and MCIs in combination, it's worth working out what your circular strategy is. And again, you have to weigh up the potentially competing benefits of those systems. What we're looking for is a low carbon circular system, and really to get there, you need to assess both in parallel. Now you can do that at a top level without going to the point of an EPD. So understanding where your performance is likely to be might be a good starting point, and as part of that, assembling the data you would need for an EPD. But yeah, I think you do need to look at both of those in combination rather than just starting with one, because there is always a risk that you can end up with a system that is nice and circular but has a higher carbon footprint, or is low carbon but not particularly circular.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I'm just noting time, and I think, Steve, you need to drop off, and noting we've got to 1 o'clock. But if anyone does have other questions, please send them over to the ecologiQ team, and we can feed those back to the speakers and get back to you. We'll also list some consultants who can offer this service. So we'll put something up on the Knowledge Hub so that you have access to people like Jim to reach out to. But yeah, just finally, a big shout out to our speakers today. Really appreciate you taking the time at strange hours of the morning as well, but in your busy day jobs. So thanks again, everyone. And yeah, any suggestions or anything you want to know more about, please let the ecologiQ team know, and we'll look at holding some follow-up sessions to this. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Polly.
Everybody.
Thanks all.
Thanks all.
Thank you all.
Bye.